What if curiosity isn't as harmless as it seems? What if a single question has the power to alter everything you thought was certain? My story isn't about love, it's about that razor-thin line between longing and regret. They say curiosity killed the cat, but for me, curiosity reshaped my life forever. Before I unravel the details, I want to express my gratitude to all who support my writing. If this story intrigues you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more engaging content. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. Your feedback means the world to me. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. I never pictured myself as the kind of woman who would question her marriage, let alone betray it. I was married to Greg, a good man by every definition. He was kind, hard-working, and the type of husband many women dream of. But even the best marriages can sometimes feel average. It began innocuously one evening as I scrolled through my phone. I stumbled upon an article titled, "Does Size Really Matter?" It was obvious clickbait, yet curiosity got the better of me. As I read, I couldn't help but reflect on my own life. Greg and I had been together for 12 years, and while our intimacy was steady, it had never been earth-shattering. He was average in every way, comforting, predictable, and yes, average in size. I'd never thought much of it before, or so I believed. But that article planted a seed of doubt. It wasn't that I was unhappy or dissatisfied, it was the unknown that gnawed at me. What if size really did matter? What if I had been missing out on something extraordinary? For weeks, that thought lingered in the back of my mind. It wasn't a conversation I could have with Greg. How do you tell your husband that you're curious about what else is out there? The guilt of even entertaining the thought weighed on me, but the curiosity was stronger. One night, after Greg had gone to bed, I found myself Googling things I never thought I would. Stories, forums, confessions. It was like opening Pandora's box. Women shared their experiences, and many swore that size did make a difference. I felt a mix of shame and excitement as I read. Was it wrong to wonder? Eventually, wondering wasn't enough. I convinced myself it was just for research, just to quell my curiosity. I created a profile on a dating site, under a fake name. I didn't use a photo, just a vague description of what I was looking for. It felt thrilling, like rediscovering a side of me I hadn't seen in years. The messages poured in almost immediately. Men of all types sent photos and bold introductions. Some were crass, others were charming. But I had one criterion. I wanted someone who fit the description of what I was curious about. And then I found him. His name was Ethan, a man in his early 30s with a confident smile and an athletic build. His messages were flirty but respectful, and he didn't shy away from addressing the very thing I was curious about. This is insane, I thought to myself as we exchanged messages late into the night. Ethan lived about an hour away and seemed genuinely interested in meeting. He didn't push, didn't make me feel cheap. Instead, he made me feel alive. I told myself it would only be once, just to see, just to know. But as I lay in bed, the phone's glow illuminating the dark room, I couldn't have imagined how that one decision would spiral into something uncontrollable. My heart raced as I got ready that afternoon. Greg was at work, and I told him I was meeting an old friend for coffee. In a way, it wasn't a complete lie. I was meeting someone new, and I'd likely have coffee before driving home. At least, that's how I justified it. Ethan and I had agreed to meet at a modest hotel just off the highway. It wasn't a cheap dive, but it wasn't extravagant either, just anonymous enough to keep my secret safe. As I drove, a knot of nerves tightened in my stomach. Signing up for that site had been crossing a line, but meeting Ethan in person was a whole new level of betrayal. Still, I couldn't resist. The pull was too strong. When I arrived, Ethan was already waiting in the lobby. He was taller than I'd imagined, with broad shoulders and an easy smile that seemed to melt away my anxiety. He walked up to me casually, as if we were old friends meeting after years apart. "You made it," he said warmly, his voice steady and confident. I nodded, too nervous to speak. My mind screamed at me to leave, to turn around before I did something I couldn't take back. But my body remained rooted, drawn to him in a way I couldn't explain. We didn't waste time. Ethan had already booked a room. As we stepped inside, guilt surged through me like a wave. My wedding ring felt impossibly heavy on my finger, a stark reminder of the vows I was about to break. "This is your last chance to back out," Ethan said, his eyes searching mine. I hesitated, but only for a moment. "I want this," I whispered, almost as if saying it louder would make it more real. The next few hours were a blur of sensations I'd never experienced before. Ethan was everything I had read about, and more confident, attentive, and undeniably skilled. For the first time in my life, I felt a kind of pleasure that was almost overwhelming. When it was over, we lay there in silence. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with conflicting emotions. Guilt, excitement, shame, and satisfaction all tangled together in a chaotic mess. Ethan turned to me, his hand tracing lazy circles on my arm. "Was it worth it?" he asked. I couldn't look at him. Instead, I nodded, biting my lip to keep from crying. It had been worth it, and that was the most terrifying part. I had just risked everything for one afternoon, and I knew I would do it again. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. Guilt clung to me like a shadow, but it couldn't overshadow the craving that had taken root. Ethan had awakened something in me, a side I didn't know existed. I tried to bury the memories of our encounter, throwing myself into daily routines, but it was futile. Every glance at Greg reminded me of the deception I had woven, yet it also reminded me of the thrill I couldn't let go of. Ethan's messages became the highlight of my days. A simple, "good morning" from him was enough to send my heart racing. We planned another meeting, and this time there was no hesitation. The excuses came easier: a yoga class, a work errand, and lunch with an old friend. Each lie rolled off my tongue with practiced ease, and Greg, ever trusting, didn't suspect a thing. When Ethan and I met again, it felt even more intoxicating than the first time. The anticipation, the secrecy, the raw passion was a combination I couldn't resist. As the soft afternoon light filtered through the blinds, I traced my fingers along his chest, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. "You're addicted," I told him, my voice barely above a whisper as we lay entangled afterward. He smirked, his eyes catching the golden light, and replied, "Good. I want you to keep coming back." For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the distant hum of traffic outside. Ethan reached out, his fingers brushing a stray strand of hair from my face. "You know," he began, his voice softer now, "every time I see you, it feels like stepping out of reality, like this is the only place where things make sense." His words startled me. I searched his face for signs of teasing, but all I saw was honesty, a vulnerability that caught me off guard. "You make me feel alive," he continued, his hand resting against my cheek. "I don't know what this is, Claire, but I can't get enough of it. Of you." I felt my throat tighten, emotions bubbling to the surface that I wasn't ready to confront. "Ethan," I started, but he cut me off with a gentle kiss, one that lingered longer than it should have, as if he was afraid to let me go. In that moment, I realized that whatever this was between us, it was more than just an escape. It was something that neither of us fully understood, yet neither could walk away from. And I did. Over the next few weeks, our encounters became a regular escape from the monotony of my life. With Ethan, I felt alive, seen, desired. But with every meeting, the weight of my lies grew heavier. Greg remained oblivious, his trust in me unwavering, and that only made the guilt harder to bear. One evening, as Greg and I sat on the couch watching TV, he reached over to hold my hand. The warmth of his touch sent a pang of regret through me. "I love you," he said softly, his eyes meeting mine. I forced a smile, replying, "I love you too." But the words felt hollow. The truth was, I loved him, or at least I thought I did. But the person I had become wasn't the woman he had married. She was someone else entirely, someone who craved something more. Ethan didn't ask for anything more than what I gave, but he knew I was hooked. "You keep saying it's the last time," he teased one afternoon as we lay tangled in the sheets. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "It's complicated," I said. "Life always is," he replied, brushing a strand of hair from my face. The truth was, I didn't want to stop. The thought of giving Ethan up felt like cutting off a part of myself. But I knew I couldn't keep this up forever. The lies were piling up, and sooner or later, something would give. For now, though, I pushed those thoughts aside. I wasn't ready to face the consequences, not yet. My life had become a carefully orchestrated performance, a balancing act I never imagined myself capable of. To Greg, I was still the same loving wife, dependable and constant. I laughed at his jokes, planned our meals, and made sure our life together ran smoothly. But beneath that polished surface, I was unraveling. Ethan had become an addiction I couldn't resist. It wasn't just the physical thrill, though, that was undeniable. It was the way he made me feel. When I was with him, I wasn't just Greg's wife or a woman going through the motions of a predictable life. I was vibrant, daring, and utterly consumed by the allure of something forbidden. Greg never suspected a thing. His trust in me was absolute, and that only made my actions feel more surreal. It was almost as though my double life existed in an alternate reality, one that never touched the safe, stable bubble of my marriage. Ethan and I started meeting more often, our stolen moments becoming the highlight of my week. He made it easy to forget the consequences, to ignore the risks. With him, there were no strings, no demands, just an endless, exhilarating escape. One afternoon, as we lay together in a quiet hotel room, Ethan turned to me with a lazy smile. "You know this can't last forever, right?" His words startled me. "What do you mean?" I asked, propping myself up on one elbow. "You've got a life," he said simply. "A husband who thinks the world of you. I'm not saying we stop, but you have to know this kind of thing has an expiration date." I didn't want to think about that. Ethan had become my sanctuary, my secret escape from the monotony of everyday life. The thought of giving him up felt like losing a part of myself. "I'm not ready for it to end," I admitted softly. Ethan reached over, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "Then let's not think about it," he said with a grin, pulling me back into his arms. At home, life carried on as usual. Greg was as attentive and steady as ever, and I made sure to play my role perfectly. I'd perfected the art of compartmentalization, keeping my two worlds separate. I convinced myself that as long as Greg never suspected, no harm was being done. But the truth was, I was starting to lose control. Ethan occupied my thoughts constantly. Every text from him made my heart race. Every glance at my phone was a reminder of the life I was hiding. I started taking more risks, pushing the boundaries of what I thought I could get away with: longer shopping trips, extended lunch dates with friends. Every lie came easier than the last. Greg trusted me completely, and that trust became my safety net. One evening, as Greg and I sat on the couch watching a movie, I caught myself comparing him to Ethan again. Greg was everything I should have wanted: steady, kind, and reliable. But Ethan was something else entirely. He made me feel alive in a way Greg never could. I hated myself for thinking that way. Greg didn't deserve any of this. He was a good man, a loving husband who had done nothing to warrant my betrayal. And yet I couldn't stop. Ethan had awakened something in me that I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just about size, though that was undeniably a factor. It was the way he made me feel desired, the way he brought out a side of me I hadn't known existed. One afternoon, as I sat in my car after another meeting with Ethan, I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I barely recognized the woman looking back at me. She was confident, bold, and unapologetic. But she was also a liar, someone who had built her life on deception. I told myself I could keep this up, that as long as I was careful, Greg would never find out, and maybe he wouldn't. But the cracks were starting to show not in my marriage, but in me. For the first time, I allowed myself to confront the truth. I wasn't just curious anymore. I was addicted, and I didn't know if I could ever stop. The weeks with Ethan turned into months, and my double life became my new normal. It was exhausting, constantly juggling the two worlds, but the thrill of it kept me going. Every meeting with Ethan felt like stepping into a dream, and every return to Greg was like waking up to reality. But dreams don't last forever. One afternoon, as I lay next to Ethan in another quiet hotel room, he looked at me with an intensity that made my chest tighten. "You ever think about where this is going?" he asked, his voice low but steady. I avoided his gaze, tracing patterns on the sheets instead. "What do you mean?" "This," he said, gesturing between us. "I know you love your husband. I'm not trying to mess with that, but you can't keep splitting yourself in two like this." I swallowed hard, his words cutting through the haze I'd been living in. He was right. As much as I wanted to pretend I could keep both worlds separate forever, the truth was, I was playing with fire. Ethan's hand found mine, his touch gentle but firm. "You've got to figure out what you want, Claire. I'm not saying this to push you away, but you can't keep running on this tightrope. It's going to break eventually." His words stayed with me long after I left that day. For the first time, I couldn't brush away the guilt and pretend everything was fine. I loved Greg. I really did. But with Ethan, I'd found something I didn't even know I was missing. That night, as I lay in bed next to Greg, I couldn't sleep. I watched him breathe, his face soft and peaceful in the dim light. He didn't know the storm raging inside me, the choices I had to make. I thought about everything Ethan had given me: passion, excitement, the thrill of something new. But I also thought about what I stood to lose. Greg wasn't just my husband. He was my partner, my friend, the man who had built a life with me. The next morning, I made a decision. I met Ethan one last time, the weight of my choice pressing down on me the entire drive. When I walked into the room, he greeted me with his usual charm, but there was a knowing look in his eyes. "This is it, isn't it?" he said softly. I nodded, tears pricking the corners of my eyes. "I can't do this anymore, Ethan. I love my husband. I love my life, and I can't keep risking it for this." Ethan didn't argue or try to change my mind. Instead, he reached out and took my hand. "I get it," he said. "And for what it's worth, I hope you find everything you're looking for." I smiled through my tears, grateful for his understanding. Saying goodbye to him felt like letting go of a part of myself, but I knew it was the right thing to do. Driving home that day, I felt a strange sense of peace. I had found the answer to the question that started it all. Did size matter? Yes, it mattered in ways I hadn't expected. But it wasn't everything. What mattered more was the life I had built with Greg, the love and trust we shared. When I walked through the door, Greg was there, smiling as he always did. I hugged him tightly, burying my face in his chest and breathing in his familiar scent. "What's this for?" he asked, laughing softly. "Just because," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I knew I had made the right choice. Ethan had shown me something about myself, something I hadn't known I needed. But in the end, my family, my marriage, and the life I had with Greg mattered more than anything else. It wasn't easy to walk away, and the memories of Ethan would likely linger for a long time. But I had made my decision. My curiosity had nearly cost me everything, but it also reminded me of what truly mattered. Greg didn't need to know the truth. I would carry that burden alone. All he needed to know was that I loved him, and that our life together was worth more than any fleeting temptation. And that was enough for me.